After 3 days, they found him. 3 agonizing days to think about what had happened to their little boy. 3 days of horror asking yourself, how could we just assume that he was with us? Why didn't we check just to make sure? 3 days to go over and over it in your head. I could have sworn he was with the neighbors. 3 days to try to fathom how an honest oversight might turn out to be the biggest mistake of your life. They must have looked everywhere in Jerusalem, down by the creek where the kids skipped rocks for hours one Sunday afternoon, over by the merchants where children darted in between the stalls, chasing after each other, and up at the city gates where all the kids gathered to watch folks come to town from far and wide, decked out in their native garb. They must have looked everywhere in Jerusalem, everywhere but the temple. And you have to wonder, why didn't they go straight to the temple in the first place? They had just been in Jerusalem at the temple for the Passover. The temple was the center of their community. Why wasn't their first stop at the temple to look for their young Jewish boy? But who would have guessed that a 12-year-old kid would go to the house of God of his own free will? You would think that Jesus had had enough of that temple already. Luke says 5 times that they were devout in their faith, obeying all the commandments. Jesus must have heard the same stories read from that same old scroll every Sabbath day of his life. He must have been at every worship service at the local synagogue, attended every Wednesday night dinner, sat through hours of Sunday school teaching, gone to the temple each year, at least for the Passover, probably for other religious services, and he chose to hang out there in his free time? What kid wants to spend her free time in a stuffy old building with stodgy old people who have been praying the same old prayers, reciting the same old confessions, singing the same old hymns for what seems like centuries? What kid wants to go to this tired old place where they tell the same old stories from the same old dusty book week after week? What kid wants to go to that place to hear the same old speeches about sin and morality, sit with families, some of whom have been there for generations, peering up at the same old stained glass windows that outlived their benefactors ages ago? Of all the places a child could be, why are you here, Jesus? In the house of God, when you could be out skipping stones in the creek, running and playing with friends? Why are you here in the temple? Why are you here in the church? Despite their religious commitment, his parents did not understand why he had to be in this place. Even though they raised him in the faith community, they could not understand why he had to be here. They knew he was immersed in those Bible stories each week. They knew all the teachers and pastors and coaches and choir directors and friends who had taught this child. With each newborn child brought into this place, they probably pledged themselves along with their congregation to share their faith with the young, to be guides and companions through the deep waters of life. And yet they could not understand why their child of the church would choose to be in this place. Maybe they believe that what kids really want is to be entertained, to go where the crowd goes, where the culture is young and hip and the show is dynamic. Maybe Jesus had even pushed back on them about how boring temple service had become. I'm sure that sacrificing bulls and turtle doves is exciting the first time around, but after a while, everything outgrows its novelty. Maybe they believe that what kids really want is to be as far away from adults as possible, to run with kids who are just like them, who come from the same neighborhoods, dress just like they do, and own the same stuff. What parents are going to search for their lost children in the church? But there in the temple, they find him sitting among the teachers, those who bear the gift of knowing where a young child's hunger runs the deepest and knowing how to lead her towards something that can satisfy. The gift of welcoming questions that cannot be answered but can only be lived. The gift of sharing struggles with the faith openly so that children learn that to be strong, they don't have to hide their wounds or their doubts. No wonder Jesus was in the temple. He was with the teachers. with those special people of his faith community whose hearts skip a beat when a child learns or questions or challenges or grows. No wonder Jesus was in the temple. He came to be taught, to take all those stories that he learned week after week, all those hymns that he sang each Sabbath day, all those commandments that his parents lived year after year, and struggle with them in the presence of those teachers who were not afraid of his questions, but welcomed them. And if we are so surprised that a child of the church would choose to hang out in this place, maybe it's because we are the lost ones, just as lost as Mary and Joseph. Lost because we've bought into the barrage of marketing teaching us that the natural way kids assert their independence is by wanting what everybody else their age wants to wear or watch or listen, so the market can sell the illusion of independence right back to them in the largest consumer group possible. Lost because we think that what our kids need from us is to keep running from thing to thing instead of helping them slow down long enough to ask the harder questions. When am I going to be satisfied with who I am? What is my purpose in this world? How do I make sense of the brokenness in my family, in my world, in myself? Lost because we accept what passes for common knowledge that kids today just naturally hate anything that's not new and hip, as if the most powerful economic forces ever created in the history of the world were not targeting all of our children every second of the day, trying to figure out how to shape them and us into consumers who are slaves to novelty. Maybe we are the lost ones because we've forgotten to listen to our kids themselves when they are untethered from the matrix of illusion long enough to tell us what hurts, what inspires, what angers, what needs mending and healing. Because the boy Jesus chooses to come here. With so many other places in the world that promise fulfillment, meaning, and redemption, Jesus chooses to be here in this temple. And I know he hasn't come here because there's nothing else of interest in the world. I think he has come because he knows that this can be the place where 12-year-olds are respected for who they are instead of just for what they can buy. Welcome to question, to listen, and to answer. He knows that this can be the place where children choose to come. He knows that this can be the place where he can wrestle with his faith with adults who aren't afraid to live the questions, who will love him and challenge him and listen to him no matter what. He knows that the church can be the place where parents search for their lost children. And if we want to find him here, we've got to be willing to sit down on the floor with our children to teach, to listen, and to answer, not to spit out facts, not to spoon-feed the truth, but to build relationships of trust in the context of a tradition that has taught people how to find meaning in a world of excess, taught people how to survive when their family world falls apart, how to be suspicious of powers that cajole or threaten or seduce. Isn't that what the church is all about? A place where we commit ourselves to young people from the moment they step through the doorway to sit with them and listen to them? Not because we are the best entertainment on the block, we'll never be that. Not because we have all the answers, but because we expect to be amazed and astonished at their understanding and their answers. Because we expect to meet Jesus in a 12-year-old boy or a 7-year-old girl. Because we have faith that the church can be the place where 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds share a relationship that might not be found anywhere else. And I know that not every 12-year-old wants to be in the church. I know it well. Some will conclude there's nothing here for them. Some will conclude they don't connect with the tradition, its resources, its questions, or its worldview. Some will leave and never come back despite the church's best efforts. But if they leave, let it be after we have insisted on giving them something significant enough to reject. After we have insisted on giving them something significant enough to contest. after we have insisted on giving them something significant enough to challenge. Let it be after they know the tradition that drives us out into the world to tutor children in our schools or stand with children for recreation and summer jobs. Let it be after they know the centuries of wisdom our tradition offers on the experience of suffering and the call to freedom. Let it be after they know the courage our tradition extends to those who find themselves oppressed by tyrants or religious leaders or powers and principalities supposedly stronger than good. Let it be after we have allowed them to push us into different ways of expressing our faith in the church and the world. Let them leave knowing the tradition they have rejected as thoroughly as Jesus knew his own. Of all the places this child could be, he chooses to be here in this place. God in the flesh, who comes not on a horse and chariot, not in power from on high, but as a child, a 12-year-old child whose mom and dad are worried sick about him, a child who comes to learn. And if we let this child, Jesus, teach us, we will have to begin by imagining that the all-powerful voice of God isn't limited to the scholar or to the preacher or to the prophet, but that voice speaks from our children. The voice of God speaks from our children. I pray that we will continue to listen.